Come Deliverance 2 is an aggressively realistic medieval action RPG that somehow found a way to transmute activities ordinarily about as fun as watching the heat death of the universe into gold. Don't like repetitive manual labor? Perhaps I could interest you in becoming the absolute bane of Bohemia through an ungodly amount of alchemy. Maybe you have the real-life social capacity of a Discord mod and hate interacting with others in any medium that isn't behind a screen. Try haggling over everything. Or maybe you're simply channeling your inner Asmongold and only bathe every alternating business year. Well, they have maidens for that, but wash your ass, dog. That's disgusting. Having been snubbed from its rightfully deserved RPG of the Year award at the Game Awards last year, I felt it vitally important to take a look back on what made Come Deliverance 2 so great in the first place. It's an aggressively grounded 13th century rags to riches story that is perfect for the type of person who pops a half chub at the word spring cleaning and systematic ethnic cleansing of the local Roman population. The game manages to perfectly blend realistic mechanics with an incredibly fun power fantasy, and you could easily get 100 hours out of it through engaging with all that it has to offer. Just as soon as you grow weary of brewing potions over and over again, the game throws an insolent bandit camp to slaughter your way, only for you to sell their wares and buy even more potion recipes, like that toxic ex your dumbass keeps going back to. It's an incredibly satisfying gameplay loop that generally doesn't overstay its welcome, and manages to make activities that are ordinarily trivialized in other games feel incredibly important and rewarding. Even something as simple as the act of bathing or washing your clothes can be incredibly helpful or harmful to succeeding in persuasion. No noble is going to take some beggar covered in blood seriously, in the same way that no bandit is going to feel threatened by some puffed up peacock dressed up like Snoop Dogg in Starsky and Hutch. Fortunately, the game really sells the strengths and limitations of whatever build you're going for, and even if you're some socialist dork who refuses to flex your wealth on the masses, there's still a lot of ways to progress through it. Whether it's simply brute forcing your way through everything, consuming more potions than a 12th century herbalist with a crippling poppy addiction, or going sneaky beaky style and pilfering everything you can get your hands on, Come Deliverance 2 respects your freedom to choose how you want to tell Henry's story. Now, to be fair, it's not exactly what I'd call Fallout New Vegas levels of player expression, but it gets the job done. And outside of scripted story events, there's quite a lot of variety on how you reach the end goal of trying to unite the lands of Bohemia. That being said, those scripted moments can be a little bit frustrating and break immersion at times. I'll never forget my experience of first visiting the fort of Nebakov, completely eviscerating the populace because they wouldn't let me eat fucking soup, and then having them completely respawn in a later scripted mission, only to fuck my shit up Asanobo style. It seems a little cowardly to have a game so focused on hyper-realism be too afraid to have you fail or finish the game early, and I really think forced plot contrivances break the selling point of hyper-realism. Fortunately, these scripted moments are sparse, as most activities in the game are rather open-ended. The quests themselves do generally feel incredibly believable though, rather than fantastical or externally motivated. I like that the consequences to some side quests often play out how you would expect them to naturally occur in real life, rather than some idealized what should happen outcome, and that the game doesn't hold your hand to guarantee the best results. Some quests, especially one involving a family feud, actually sometimes spits in your face even if you did most things right. And while it does feel annoying in the moment, this world is meant to remind you that sometimes life is not fair and people can be assholes. Now don't get me wrong, I absolutely went Donnie Thornberry on that family and fucked their shit up 16 ways to Sunday. But still, I understood why it happened. It's called maturity, dork. Look it up. Conversely though, said quests often have the same pacing and fluidity as watching two snails fuck on a hot sunny day. It can be a massive slog trying to progress through certain quests due to their "go there, come back, did I say come back, I actually meant go there" repetitive progression route. Again, I understand that life sometimes just ends up that way, and the game is trying to simulate that, but there's too much downtime between the actual fun moments in this game, and either they need to fill the world with more things that keep you engaged, or make the quests more rewarding to progress through. For this next point, I'm actually going to argue with the contrarians a bit, and say that I think the combat is much more enjoyable and refined than the first game. Sure, it's still a bit clunky at times, which we'll get to later, but engaging in the deadly dance with every bandit you meet is much more pleasant this time round, rather than the first game, where every encounter was simply you role-playing as a socially anxious turtle afraid of getting the consumption for 8 minutes until you finally got the chance to one-hit kill your opponent with a master strike to the face. A vocal minority have complained that the combat was dumbed down, and I understand that to hardcore purists this is a less fun experience overall. But unfortunately for them, sometimes sacrificing a little realism for actually enjoying the damn game you're playing is a worthy sacrifice to make. I will admit though that the progression of combat is incredibly ass backwards and inverted from what you'd normally expect. I know they tried to pull the getting assaulted made you lose your fighting skills card on you at the beginning of the game, but it's a little poorly thought out, making the guy who was basically a master at martial combat struggle to take on a few early game enemies, only to inversely somehow be able to treat master swordsmen like cheap $4 Filipino hookers in the late game.
Oh my.
I hope that in the next game, rather than trying to pretend Henry can't fight because of reasons, they make it so that the obstacles and challenges he faces are beyond just normal bandits and we treat him with the respect he deserves. That being said, it can still be incredibly clunky at times, such as with the lock-on system and randomly being unable to attack after you got hit. But honestly, at this point, I don't even know if there's a way to smooth it out without making it feel completely unbelievable. It's nice having a game that doesn't feel like it took its combat cues from fucking anime of all places, like most other games seem to do nowadays. But regardless, certain aspects of the combat were still a little frustrating and will hopefully get improved with the next game. For instance, the stamina system is dog shit, like really bad. I guess Warhorse Studios were catering to the average donut American with this game, because you run out of stamina way too fast during fights. Even with potions and perks to help you, it gets incredibly tedious spending the first half of the game constantly out of breath because you swung your sword 3 times in combat. Even in my playthrough where I tried to build Henry as a witcher, basically prancing about the battlefield with the grace and dexterity of a flamboyant coked up ballerina, even I had to constantly stop mid-fight to rest and recuperate. I can only imagine how frustrating it must have been for someone in heavy plate armor having to catch their breath like an obese Sisyphus every 3 minutes. Fortunately, there are lots of ways to supplement your combat through potions, archery, and even the fucking ye old blicky of yore if you were so inclined. KCD 2 lives by one simple motto: any problem you can't beat through your own metal can always be solved through a healthy dose of exogenous hormones or extra firepower to help. In fact, this might be a bit of a fringe position, but I genuinely would love to see the next game go absolutely bonkers on the power fantasy aspect and give you a whole bunch of toys to play with. Give me disguises, flaming arrows, hell, even a fucking Molotov or rudimentary black powder bomb of some sorts. I'm not saying remove the grounded realism from the game though. I know it's a fundamental aspect of what makes it so unique, but it's high time we move on from constantly trying to gaslight ourselves that Henry is just a peasant with no combat skills, when we've had 2 games basically end with us being a walking one-man army. Speaking of armies, for a game where military presence is basically the entire theme, it's quite strange how lacking enemies and patrols are. I don't know if it's a technical limitation, but I honestly would have preferred skipping the second playable area for a single region with a much more dense population. I know the game tells you that forces are spread thin because of the events, but sweet googly moogly, there's this whole large open world that is filled with absolutely fuck all to see or do. Even in other games with large, relatively empty open worlds, there's still tons of rewarding points of interest or combat areas to keep you entertained. But with KCD 2, I literally had to progress the main questline at a certain point, because I was only getting 2 low-level bandits I could easily slaughter like every 20 minutes of in-game time. I suppose one of the advantages of this is that the game is incredibly polished and runs rather smoothly, which once again raises the question of why companies with smaller budgets are so consistently able to put out stable, well put together games when their supposed superiors keep delivering shitty half-baked products they charge you $70 for. That's a rhetorical question, by the way. It's because shareholders care about as much for making good games as you and I do for fondling a horse's. Regardless, it seems that releasing a game in a stable, non-buggy state is a Herculean task nowadays, and Warhorse Studios should be praised for doing so. Sure, there is some jank, but that's kind of part of the charm of these Eurojank games, and it's more a part of trying to squeeze as much out of systems as possible, rather than simply not taking the time to make sure your game runs smoothly. Regardless of everything thus far, like I mentioned at the start of the video, KCD 2 absolutely deserved to get RPG of the Year in 2025. And while I understand it would have been a little bit weird not giving it to Expedition 33, it still is definitionally the better role-playing game of the two. Not necessarily the better game, mind you. I personally preferred Clair Obscur more. But even though the actual awards themselves are a laughable joke at this point, it still would have been nice to give a game with so much love, care, and attention put into it at least the category it excels at. It's like giving the Throat Goat of the Year award to your cousin Larry instead of Felicia, the googly-eyed blind meth head with no teeth. Sure, Larry presents himself better, but we know where your heart truly belongs, bro. In the end though, the question still remains, how does Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 fare a year later? Well, if you want a heavily grounded experience with satisfying combat and RPG mechanics set in a highly beautiful open world, then you can't go wrong with KCD 2. It's one of the most thoughtful and unique experiences to date, and unlike other highly original experiences, I'm looking at you, Bannerlord and For Honor, this game doesn't abuse the fact that there is little to no competition. At the very least, this game definitely deserves a buy on a sale. Not only because you owe it to yourself to try something different, but also because Warhorse Studios deserves the recognition for the great game they made. Anyways, I'm out, and I hope to see you in the next one.